Good afternoon. I'm Stephen Matchett, and
And I'm Tim Winkler, and this is a special webinar brought to you by Future Campus. We would like to start by acknowledging that we're living and working on variously the Yorta Yorta, Gadigal and Kaurna country, with an audience tuning in from many areas of the nation. Whatever country you're joining us from, we pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. Today, Stephen's going to lead us in on the questions, and I'll interject occasionally with questions from the floor. We've got a range of very keen people to hear lessons from founding a whole new university in Australia. And so if you can lodge your questions in the Q&A area, I'll triage them and we'll try and get to as many as possible of them during the hour. We're delighted to welcome you today to, it's really a debrief on the biggest university transformation since John Dawkins created the Unified National System a generation back, the establishment of Adelaide Uni.
yeah, in fact, I think it's bigger than Dawkins. I mean, that was often a series of takeovers, some successful, like Monash and the then famous Caulfield Institute of Tech, and some not so, like UNE and the Northern Rivers CAE. But this is much harder, as it seems to me from the outside, because it's a merger of equal partners. It is a hell of a thing to have done. And it's a very South Australian thing to have done. After World War II, Thomas Playford decided he was going to modernise Australia by inviting industry and building a strong industrial base, which lasted into the 80s. Now, another Labor Premier once had an original idea of creating a giant university because ideas and information are the engineering wealth of the 21st century. Where we are now is that the vice-chancellors of the University of Adelaide and University of South Australia have nearly got it there. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Peter Hoy, VC of the soon not to be University of Adelaide. And
Thanks
good
for having
afternoon,
me.
David Lloyd, who's now the last employee of the fast disappearing University of South Australia. Gents, after 2 years at this, you two blokes must be absolutely buggered. So thanks for sparing the time.
No problem, Stephen. For us, it's probably been three. Because there's the pre-incubation before you get to the point of actually starting to do things.
So tell me where you are now. I mean, with what, 6 months or so to go, how are things going? I mean, you'll obviously open, but is everything going to be on time and as operational as you hoped on day one?
Yeah, so Stephen, we have two phases in this large project. One is a transition phase, which brings the two universities together to a functional university that will open on the 1st of January 2026. It's a university where we would say that things have not gone backwards, but it's also a university that will have to go through a transformation phase of 4 years until 2030, where the real value that can be accrued from this merger will be expressed through further work.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the specifics of the question, we have a component pathway program which has deliverables which are on the critical path to open a competitive university, and we're on track to do that. We're on budget to do that. There will be a significant amount of work to do that transformation piece, as Peter alluded to. And that begins, some of the transformation has begun now, and some of that transformation will endure for years after we open. And that roadmap is what we set out when we said, this is what we want to set out to build, recognizing that it's going to take you 7 years from the conception to the realization of that conception.
So as of next year, will undergrads, existing students, will they notice much different?
Clearly, the ones who start next year won't, because they will realize nothing. I think the students that will realize the biggest difference are those in year 2, because David and I took on this massive task of totally rejuvenating and recreating a new curriculum for the new university. And clearly we had to have it ready for year 1, which we're very clear we will have. But we also pre-created new content and new courses for year 2. So some of the students who would have seen a particular year 2 program in either University of Adelaide or University of South Australia will see a new program which will still have the same learning objectives, but hopefully with a much more modernized curriculum.
And I tried to find out about it and was resolutely blocked. Your defences were up and successful, but about the embedded, the new core curricula across the whole syllabus. Can you talk anything about that now?
Yep.
Yeah, a little bit. We brought the kind of core outline for that core content through the academic board at the last session of academic board a couple of weeks back, and what our view was that, if you go back to when UniSA was stood up, it was the first university in Australia to have graduate qualities embedded in the curriculum, and Peter and I saw that that's a really great way to inculcate a type of graduate as they come out of an institution. So when we talked about what would be different, and then all Australian universities went about doing the same thing, right? And it wasn't designed by us. That goes back to Denise and the way in which she drove that initiative before we took the reins. But when you go to what we could achieve here, we thought so much of the feedback we get from employers they're less about soft skills, they're actually about skills, right? And skills which are inculcated with the kind of professional skills or the core disciplinary training that you want to get from a graduate. So we thought, well, what are those things that we can start to articulate that would add value to the graduate, to the employer of the graduate, and to wider society? So we have these common cores, which they deal with First Nations knowledges, they deal with design thinking and innovation, they deal with entrepreneurship, they deal with ethics, they deal with AI. And we're trying to scaffold those in as we can into the self-accredited programs that we have as a university, where we have the headspace to put those in for students, and then back them into the externally professionally accredited programs where we have headspace, again, to introduce those pieces. So students will have choice to take these things, but we want students to take those so that it's part of the definition of what an Adelaide University graduate will be.
So TEXA, did TEXA have to get involved on that?
Not from a self-accreditation perspective.
No.
Of course not, yourself. Yes.
Yeah.
Question. Sorry. Yeah.
That's all right. No, I mean, TEXA have an interesting view of everything on this.
So Stephen, of course, we did have to get TEXA registration.
Yeah.
And we were formed. We started as a new university on the 8th of March, 2024, and we got our TEXA registration through, I think, David, in May. So there was a considerable journey there where lots of assurances had to be given, but we're TEXA registered. We can offer degrees.
Stephen, could I just jump in and with a question there? You're undertaking an incredibly challenging task, creating a giant new university in a way that nobody else has for a while. Did you have to change the way that you acted as leaders? Did you have to leave behind ego? Did you make mistakes that you learned from that you hadn't done before?
The answer to all of that is probably yes, right? I mean, and then we could deliver a whole list of things where I think we do things much more efficiently and coherently together as co-vice-chancellors today than we did on the 8th of March when we stood up. But we were working towards. I mean, the interesting piece was we were working towards the creation of a university. We each had to convince our own institutions that it was a good thing from their own individual perspective. And then we had to pivot to think about, well, what is actually in the interest of the future institution that will bring the old institutions along with them? So there was a really interesting intellectual partitioning going on. And then we have different styles of operation. We've known each other since the day I arrived in Australia. So we've known each other a long time. But we have different ways of working. But when you think about it, together we've got nearly 30 years experience in running universities. And we said, well, let's design an institution which would be a new and differentiated institution. And every choice we have to make, we bring our individual perspectives. So you almost get a 360 around every choice. It made it at the start marginally slower because we'd have review and then we'd have handover and we'd have review. Now the review and, oftentimes we land right on the same thing at the same moment. And then where we have differences of view or we've got differences of perspective or experience, we kind of layer in this richness around the idea. There are very few. I can't actually think of anything where we've actually sat down and said, no, we're not, like we just had a complete polar opposite disagreement. We'd always find a middle ground and it wouldn't be the average. It would be something that would actually be better than just the idea.
Yeah, so maybe I can just collar that in. I think it was more difficult early on because we were always clear that this was a merger and not a takeover either way. But I think our staff expected us to go in and bat hard so they were not taken over. And it took David and I a while to actually convince people that we primarily work for a new university in this transition phase, Adelaide University. The other thing about decision making, and David referred to the fact that between us, we would have 30 years of VC experience. We have probably been quite fortunate to have been the decision maker in our institutions who could say, well, you might not think this is a good idea, but I'm the Vice-Chancellor and I think it is. I think our decision making has become better because we can't say that to each other. You have somebody with 12 years experience questioning everything I do and vice versa. And I think it slowed things down in the beginning, but it meant that we had ultra tested what we landed on. So that's been a privilege actually to have to do that.
Peter Hoyt, was it harder for you, given the culture of the long-established culture of yours, to convince staff about the ideas of embedded starts in curricula, but it might have been at UniSA?
There were probably more people who went public with their doubts about it, but it hasn't been particularly hard. You rarely hear from the people who support you, but mostly from those who fear that this is not a good idea. We haven't heard much recently, so I don't think it was harder for me than for David. It was just different things people were worried about, because there are things, I mean, I used to be Vice-Chancellor at University of South Australia and I loved it because of some of the fresh approaches that university had. And I think whilst some University of Adelaide people are worried about the traditional view of what a university does disappearing, I think equally at David's place, people said, well, we worry that we're going to become a traditional university when we don't want to become a traditional university.
Just parenthetically, it's a hell of a thing. You've been the Vice-Chancellor of 2 Group of 8 universities and a challenger brand with respect in those days, and also head of the ARC.
Yeah.
It's quite a CV.
Yeah, no, I've been very fortunate. And I do think it assists that both David and I mean, I was head of the ARC, but David was head of the Irish Research Council. So we had some formative years that are quite similar. So the differences are much smaller than the commonalities between us.
Yeah. We're both first in family to go to university, and we both have a very, lived understanding of just how transformative education is. So when we sat down and we said, look, what's this uni going to be about? Arriving at it being about for purpose, being societal cohesion, being about transformative agenda, and not just being another uni. We landed on a mission really, really easily and early.
I still find it hard to believe you haven't been playing rock, paper, scissors back in the office somewhere along the line, surely.
One day we will tell you about a couple of the things where we decided, well, if we do this, we will also do this, because there were things that I was particularly passionate about, and there were things that David was particularly passionate about. But I think we landed in the right spot. And
even in those ones, there were ones where we had to make significant decisions, and we could see kind of future consequences of those decisions. But it wasn't about a legacy protection. It was about a forward trajectory. So some of the decisions we had to reach, there's never been a decision that we haven't had consensus on. But to reach consensus in some cases took longer than the ones that were instantaneous. Right now, they're nearly all off you go. Right, the machination of debate is diminished significantly since we've been working together.
Stephen, I've just got another.
Asked about Adelaide and culture. What about UniSA and culture? I mean, in your time there, you went a fair way to embed your Stanford idea.
Yeah.
Get you to explain. Are people worried about losing that?
No, look, I think one of the most interesting questions that we got asked in the incubation phase, in the white paper development phase, in the business case articulation, and even like when we were in the parliamentary inquiries, were all about what's the culture of the new university going to be. And I mean, I can give you my personal perspective is that the culture of a university is a point in time representation of the totality of the people who are in the institution. And that is what manifests as the culture. And you get an articulation of purpose, you get an articulation of mission, you've got the act that sits behind it, you've got all the things that it exists to do, and how it does what it exists to do is kind of a function of who's at the door at any given time. I used to say that the culture in UniSA when Denise was there was different to the culture when Peter was there, which is different to the culture when I was there. But everyone still talks about the UniSA culture. But it's that evolution through that time. So for this one, my comfort level was pretty high that we will be able to articulate a mission, a vision, a values, a purpose, which are all of those kind of guardrails for culture. And then as it takes form, and there'll be friction, I think, over the first 4 or 5 years as it finds its feet. But then in a steady state, how people then interpret what it is it exists to do will shape that culture piece. So people did fear that the UniSA way would be lost. But then when you really push them to say, what is the UniSA way? It's can do. And can you give me examples where we're integrating can not do into this? So we're bringing that forward, right? And I'm not a psychologist. I think this all boils down to the psychology of change, right? People are comfortable doing what they're doing. We're doing something which has not been done this century in a way that's never been tried. And it's understandable that people are going to say, well, they'll hang on to whatever life raft they can have to stop themselves being brought into that vortex of change. And the life raft is often culture, but it's a very intangible thing to define.
Do you think you've won them? Do you think the fear is gone? Insofar as it can.
Mechanistically, I think the one of the strongest things we've done in the creation of the institution is, first of all, we've been really open. Right? We talk about where we want to go. We say, this is an objective that we have. It gets challenged, and then it becomes how are we going to do it? Right? And the how we're going to do it becomes the path. On the curriculum. So when we said, I remember we said, we're going to have a new curriculum. And like, I remember I have somewhere, I will at some stage, it'll go into an archive. I have a piece of paper where I was trying to figure out how many hours of effort it was going to take us to do this transformation of the curriculum based on everything we had in the past. And we knew when we would need to have this thing open, and it was impossible. It was like there was no way we would have the curriculum transformed for day one even with infinite resource. So we went, all right, well, what's the accreditation cycle of a university? Well, it's typically 7 years. So if we did it over a 7-year period, what would that look like? And what would we have done for day one? And how would you spread it out over time? And how would we do it? And the way we did it was we said to staff, we're going to have a new curriculum. So everywhere where we have commonality, you guys need to come together and tell us what it's going to be. And that was where we could have an explosion from a cultural perspective, but we didn't. We have teams of hundreds of staff who are delivering new curriculum based on the premise that what they're doing is different to the two organizations and preserves the best of the organizations, but it's going to be better. And that to me is when I thought, nah, we've got this. This is how it's going to work.
So Stephen, it was very important for us to come up with a value proposition. And one of them was based on some observations we had. Universities are really, really good at creating new courses and putting them on. And some of them, they just don't have enough students wanting to take them, but they never get killed off. So between us, we had about 5,600 courses. And David and I made the decision that we should try to go into a new university and use this opportunity to create half of those courses. So one, we would get more viable course units. And that's really important in this day and age when there's certain disciplines where a very small proportion of students want to do certain disciplines. But if you have twice as big a student cohort, where 1% wouldn't be enough at the University of Adelaide, 2% will be enough to secure some disciplines future in Adelaide University because we've got more than double the students. So that was one thing. The other thing that I particularly have observed, but David knew, is that when my grandchildren, and they're 10 and 15, when they go to school, they are not weighed down by a ton of books. They're weighed down by a computer. and they are incredibly digitally alert. And we just knew that increasingly students will come to our university and say, we need a digitally underpinned, not a fully online university, but a digitally underpinned curriculum. And that was what we set out to create, to be ahead of that curve, because it will hit all universities. They need to modernize the way that information is conveyed.
When at the start of COVID, somebody inadvertently, I just came across a recording of a seminar for people starting to go online. This was like in March at your university, and it was extraordinary. The message that came out of me is that these, in the old phrase, they were learning to build they were building the airplane by learning to fly it. But there was a sense of goodwill and commitment to getting it. There was a lot of grumbling, but a sense of goodwill and commitment to getting it done. And I've been watching this since the merger, since it started, and I fear I'm naive to say it, but I've always had a sense that the sheer scope of it has created a sense of, if not unity, but of willingness at both institutions. As I say, it's probably naive, but it's still, to get anywhere near that's a hell of a thing. It's a hell of a thing to have done.
We have 1,500 people working on curriculum now, and David and I have been very fortunate that a very large proportion of our staff have been inspired enough by what we want to do to go beyond what we reasonably could expect of them.
You know, it's a unique undertaking, right? So if it was an acquisition, you would have had this resistance from one pocket or the other. We had to work hard to be like convincing and clear in demonstrating that it's not an acquisition, that it is, that each institution stepped into it for its own reasons, but in recognition that it wasn't going to be the same institution on the far side of the door. And that, I think, has brought people around. And like, fundamentally, it goes back to that cultural piece, right? I don't think, well, there are very few people who choose to be academics and to choose to teach or to be professors or senior lecturers or lecturers who don't think that what they're doing is in the interest of the students who are in front of them. So there's a common piece all the way through.
Stephen, there's a question here from the floor. There's a few questions coming through. I'll just put this one forward. The new university has ambitions to become a research powerhouse, currently sitting 128th and 300, 350 bracket for Adelaide and UNESA in times higher ed. How are you going to do it? And is there a plan for strategic elite research hires, especially in this Trumpian world where some are feeling less loved?
Rather, I can answer that. They're not going to do it. They're not going to be here.
Well, let's just say that we're going to seed it, right? And I think that one of the things is when you look at Times Higher or QS or AWRU, I think, you know, none of them are research only ranking, right? So that's one thing to bear in mind. AWRU is, I got that right? Academic World Ranking University. They're probably more research collation in the way in which the ranking works. And we know when we look at the research complementarity and outputs of the two institutions that we have a high expectation that we will perform better in that ranking than the two institutions do individually right now. We also have quiet confidence that the institution will be well positioned in the World University Rankings. And that'll be probably about 4 or 5 weeks. We'll find out when QS reveal those rankings. So we do have a research strategy. In fact, the research strategy went live for consultation today or yesterday. My temporal clock is completely fuzzy at the moment. And the research strategy we put in place. One of the things we did, we put in place this thing called Ideas Place, which is a collaborative platform where people can actually add and amplify commentary to ideas. So Anton has been working. Anton Mittelbrook is our DBC Research and Innovation. He's been working with our research leaders to say, well, what could this university do in the context of the strategy that it has published already about what it wants to achieve? He's put that out now for consultation and for amplification and augmentation. And we'll have a deliberate research strategy at the end of that process, which will be the AU strategy. And it is about being good at specific things, but also being really good at everything you do.
So
Peter
I
Hoy,
thank you for
can I-
that question. So the first thing to say is that between us right now, we have 25 highly cited researchers, which I think is the same as Monash University. But what we also have is a university that takes great pride in giving access to education to many, many people. And we put a lot of effort into helping students who might not necessarily have thought they wanted to go to university to become the best they can be. So we would take pride in being highly ranked in rankings that actually don't necessarily only measure what is easy to measure, but also tries to measure what is really important. And rankings like the QS rankings, which we think will be well placed in, comes into that. And just self-promotion, when I came to University of Queensland in 2012, it was ranked number 90 in the world with only 13 highly cited researchers. When I left 8 years later, it was, I think, 51, and it had 44 highly cited researchers, one more than Cambridge. So we know how to do it. And surely, if there's some top talent out there that would want to live in a very livable city, contact us.
Awesome.
Got a question on that. The rankings that have got a self-selecting survey component, but it must take time simply because you are a new brand. People are going to have to work out exactly who you are. That will take time to flow through. In terms of like grown-up, proper, very bibliometric ranking like Leiden, that's going to take time too because the citations are going to have to flow. Yeah. So what's that going to do to the hope, if not from you, but from other people in politics in Adelaide, that you're going to rocket up the rankings and vast numbers of international students are going to arrive?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, we were always very clear to say we don't expect to rocket up the rankings. What we want to do is create a university that can be sustainably ranked among the top. And that's our foundational kind of spread. And we've been very clear to say that the attainment of steady state for this university is from 2030 on to 2034. So that's the time frame we measure us. So I think it's one of those cases of panic slowly should you need to panic. Peter's right. We absolutely know how to approach I mean, if you want to have a ranking strategy, I think that really does a disservice to what you want to do from a societal perspective, right? So we need to make sure we don't wander off mission to hit our rankings number just because people want to have a plaque on the wall. But in engaging with the agencies, this is not the first time that universities have combined to create new universities. So they do have mechanisms by which they can look at the past and actually inculcate and recognize where past outputs. So Leiden and things like that will be manageable. QS and Times Higher will be manageable. But as Peter said, I mean, what we anticipate is the evolution of rankings that actually look at student outcomes, employability, engagement, the satisfaction of the employer, the return on investment that people get from procuring education. And so that's why the student experience piece for us is every bit as important as the research piece.
So Stephen and Tim, another thing, and I'm sure you have more questions. But I just want to make this point. Neither the University of Adelaide nor University of South Australia had any debt when we went into this. You will know from your columns, that's where we often read it, that in the 22 and 23 annual reports, probably 2/3 of Australia's universities had run consecutive deficits. Now, we have run surpluses and we have no debt and we had cash to enter into this. So this is not a merger that is created because of a crisis. This is a merger that enables us to be much stronger if there ever were another crisis.
Tim, can I just ask one before we go to questions? Is the timing right, just in terms of the way knowledge is changing, the way teaching is delivered? Was the timing right for this to happen now?
A good question. Certainly, there was an alignment of planets insofar as this is not our first tilt at trying to do something like this in this jurisdiction. We both survived previous kind of incarnations of the attempted creation of a new university through merger, and the fact that Peter and I have the relationship we have, the fact that we have history, if you like, in terms of be able to sit down and look at the future through this kind of lens of shared experience. The last uni I worked in was 399 years older than Uni SA, and Peter went from Uni SA to UQ. So you end up with that combination of experience. That was important. The intent of the state government was important because this could never have happened without a legislative imperative to enable it to happen. The fact that we had a federal government who wanted to see participation, which was key to what we wanted to do in terms of access and equity. The fact that we don't have any debt. The fact that we actually have incredibly complementary research activities in the two institutions and very complementary spectrum of academic offerings with unique programs in each institution and differentiation in the way in which we treat the ones where we both teach the same things. All of those stuff had to be in place. Then you layer in the revolution of AI and the fact that there is an expectation that change will happen. And it's all coalesced. I don't know if there was any one particular catalyst that would have primacy in that reaction, but all those bits were there.
Going to be a big university.
Yeah, it's going to be. Well, I mean, in terms of volume, it'll be number 5 in the country, and Australian universities are big. So, in international terms, it's a big university.
But by domestic students, it'll be number 1 or 2.
Mm-hmm.
And when we start, our international student percentage will be about anything between 25 and 28%. So it's a university that is not overly exposed to the international market, but which does benefit from it.
That's the perfect segue.
Sorry,
that's the perfect segue to a question from the floor, actually, Peter, which to follow up on your comments on both domestic and international numbers. Given the length of time that the project has taken and the policy changes like the Accord and changes in the international market that have happened since then, how has that affected your work?
So clearly, one of the reasons why we are doing this merger, as I said before, is to incubate us against another crisis. It could be another COVID. It could be a geopolitical crisis. It could be changed political settings. When you have the largest or second largest number of domestic students in Australia, and you only have 25 to 30% international students, you will be better able to survive a downturn. So that's a really important driver for this merger, because I think we all know that if there is a real cratering of international students, viability will be a real issue for a large number of institutions. We didn't want to suffer that. So that was one of the key reasons. Now, one of the things that has been really pleasing is we have been out telegraphing globally very strongly that this merger is happening. And what we saw is that the number of combined commences in our 2 universities in semester 1 this year for international students was virtually identical to what it was the year before. So I don't think people are running for the doors at all. If we see any decline now, it'll be hard to untangle from the damage that has been done to brand Australia and the building of a new university, where we are doing something quite risky, and that is to take 2 known brands off the market and ask people to engage with one new brand. But so far, as I said, both domestically here in South Australia and internationally, semester 1 was virtually within a plus minus 2% of what it was previously. So we were pretty pleased about that.
Are your growth targets ambitious for internationals?
No, one of the very deliberate things we did was to realize that you can't expect to go through this kind of program and then grow like Billio on the way through. You need to be consolidated. You need to actually be stable, and then grow in a responsible manner. So we in our business, and we're on the record. We've said this in parliamentary inquiries. We at steady state don't expect this institution to have anywhere over an enrollment of 31 to 33% of its population being internationals. So that's a managed growth piece from a starting point of 25 to 27 over a period of 5 to 6 years. So it's not that they're realistic. Now, I mean, the positioning of international higher education and Brand Australia will have an interesting effect on the entire perception of whether Australia is a welcoming place for international students. And I lament the word cap. Right, I think we don't have a cap in Australia, and when that word gets uttered, I just want to throttle whoever said it in terms of the damage that they may be unwillingly doing to the perception of a student to being welcomed to a country that actually has plenty of capacity to accommodate students. And we've been through a really interesting political cycle where, as you know, I mean, international students were being blamed for a migration crisis, which is utter nonsense. So we don't have unrealistic growth targets. We have a sustainable growth target, which is based on the size of the institution. And if it overperforms, it needs to maintain its social license as well. So we're very aware of that.
I've got a whole range of questions coming through from the audience. This one really interests me as well. What lessons have you learned from your revamping of curriculum and your examination of RPL and credit and so on? What lessons are there from that could transfer to harmonisation of vet and higher ed in the broader system?
That's a great question.
I think there's two pieces to that. I'll tell you what my brain went to first on hearing that question. This institution has to preserve some competitive advantage in the domestic landscape as it goes through its delivery, because we don't intend to just draw our students from South Australia. We want to be able to provide education across the whole nation through the delivery of Adelaide University Online as well. So I don't know that I go out and say this is the secret sauce about curriculum redevelopment. I think if you want to find that out, you can come work with us and for us. One of the pieces we did spend a lot of time in the mid phase of post establishment, and so probably in the last 6 months or so, looking at REPL and looking at credit and how credit really works, and trying to standardize it, because credit tends to become in some institutions a very localized control thing. When you think about it, though, it should be an institutional perspective on how credit should work. And so we did get an opportunity to harmonize the way the university operates and the university's perspective on what credit it will give for which pathways. We have in our structure a senior leader in the senior staff who deals with pathways and participation. And that's been another opportunity for us to think about what are the key roles you need to have in an organization to reflect the ambition you have in terms of delivery of the strategy.
So I think another thing to add, and this was very deliberate from David and I, was that we have a new Deputy Vice-Chancellor position, which is called Deputy Vice-Chancellor Student Experience and Success. And it goes to what we said before, Stephen and Tim, that there comes a time where people are starting to measure what is really important. And student experience is something that we have an ambition to go to number 5 in Australia for. And unless we actually nail our collars to the mast and say we will have a Deputy Vice-Chancellor who is responsible for those KPIs. And the success piece is, how do they fare after they leave our university? And that does go to preparedness to assimilate quite readily into the workforce. And so associated with that, we're ramping up the number of work integrated learning experiences that the students are having, because we actually want some rounded graduates to come out. So in a sense, we are quite open to learn from what happens in the vet scenarios and what we should adopt from that. To the specific question, I was surprised that people haven't been fighting more over ownership of their old course component as opposed to somebody else's course component. So let's say you get two people from the business school together and they have to create a new international finance curriculum or whatever. We have not had to insert ourselves in those processes. There might have been bushfires, but they're certainly not visible from David's and my perspective. And I think it's because fundamentally, and this goes to what Stephen said about, what about the cultural differences? And we've been asked rightly that question many times. And my answer is there is one much more overarching cultural similarity. We all work in universities because we know that education and innovation is what will lead to stronger societies. That is what unites us. So in that sense, I think the cultural difference between the School of Humanities and the School of Mechanical Engineering at University of Adelaide, for example, that cultural difference is probably much bigger than what it is between the center of gravity of the two universities, because we believe in the purpose of the university.
In terms of interoperability between TAFE and higher ed, I think that's going to become a really interesting space, because that is clearly a drive for the Accord. And I think the implementation of the AQF review, which we had, I don't remember, it was 5 years ago, which we still haven't really done, right? I think that's a really important part of it. I think that we need to think about how, and we've talked about it in the Adelaide attainment model, the way we've structured the curriculum, the attainment of credit as discrete blocks. And I don't want to use the word micro-credentials or anything else, right? But the articulation of what a credit-bearing unit really is, and how stackable and interoperable they are between institutions and between components of the tertiary sector is where I think the ATEC will have to take Australian education, because we know that people want to do a degree in the traditional sense, and we know that people also want to access modules of attainment in a non-traditional sense, and we're trying to position the university to be able to do that, and I think it'll become that kind of an exchange ultimately. But when somebody becomes absolutely obsessed with the definition of what a micro-credential is, you kind of lose sight of the fact that we do actually have stackable units in the way in which we construct curriculum.
But David, I think maybe a good example of how we are reaching out beyond our traditional barriers would be what you guys did with degree apprenticeships.
Yeah. I mean, so again, it's not. We haven't just discovered fire. Like that type of activity has been happening in European education for a long time, and the model in the UK was you can go to industry from the equivalent of vocational education. You can be an apprentice, and you can start to attain your education as long as you're in a supervisory, structured, and scaffolded way. You can access the education while you work. So the BAE degree apprenticeship that we put in place is the first one in Australia, and it's just been a long time coming, because we need to have the rigor of curricular articulation to allow it to happen. And I think the new uni is definitely set up for that.
And, something similar but different is that some years ago, before we were merging, we got an agreement with Lloyd for them to deliver educational segments into our degrees if students wanted to do it. And if the students fulfill their normal curriculum and that additional learning that was provided by Deloitte, they could actually get their degree plus a certificate in professional services, which exposed the students on the way through to some of the culture and expectations of what employers look for. So this is what we mean by retaining absolutely our belief in top education and top research, but actually broadening what we think is right to do. And that's the principal reason we think it's right to do. But we also think that those who go there will be better positioned to be measured by what society eventually, through big data, very big data, and now AI, will be able to measure. What happened to that student who went through university A or B? How long did it take them to become assistant CFO to CFO to running the joint? I think those measures will come. It can only be a matter of time.
Good. That touches on a couple of questions that we haven't addressed and two very big audiences that we haven't mentioned. One is your professional staff. Inevitably, you look at the product and the services that are academic, but you've got around half your workforces keep the show on the road. In a general sense, what's it been like for them? Has it been different to what the academics have experienced?
I think the active involvement in creation of curriculum sits on one side of the fence. The active articulation of ways of working and the way in which the institution is going to operate, that's been in the bailiwick of the professional staff. We realized very early on that in the creation of a new university through a merger, it would create an absolute shockwave as people said, well, this is going to be an opportunity to downsize on the staff. And then lift it and reinvest. So I mean, in July of, was it 23, Peter? Or was,
yeah. It's one of our big decisions, I think. Yeah.
July 23, we went very clearly out in public and we said that people are not going to be compulsorily retrenched. People are not going to be made compulsorily redundant. It's just, that's not the ambition in this. And we've worked all the way through to make sure that that was made evident to people the whole way through. And it's interesting, the retention rates of our staff are at their highest that they've ever been. So the attrition rate of staff in both institutions are the lowest we've seen since we've been measuring the records. Now, we have, in the same way as we articulate the kind of curriculum contents, we've had to do a whole org structure for this organization. And the people who understand the ways of working are subject matter experts who are the professional staff. So we've had, again, hundreds of people involved in the articulation of those things. And, there's enough work in the creation of the institution and the preservation of, I mean, I don't think universities function without a great professional staff. So having our staff aligned to what the objective of the institution is, making sure that they feel like they're actually valued on the way through and giving them the opportunity to shape the ways of working has been the way we've brought people along. I think that's it's at the heart of the question, Stephen. I think it was probably more fear on the professional staff side than there was on the academic staff side because of the nature of the work they do in the context of the delivery of the mission of the institution. But I hope that all the steps that we're taking and the way in which we're going through the processes we're doing now under the EAs has gone some way to assuaging.
Is it going to mean productivity improvements, not in the sense of cutting heads, but in creating resources to grow and do new things and meet new markets?
Peter, do you want to go? Because I gave a really long answer to the last question.
So I think the decision we made, Stephen, was to give people a job guarantee until mid-2027. And we do not have any plans to do anything after 2027. But it's probably as far out as you can bind an organization. 4 years we bound the organization. And people might say, wow, that's a big thing. But we could afford it. As I said, we went into this in very good financial position, both of us. But what we also knew is if people had to fear for their position and jobs, we wouldn't have them putting enough energy into creating what is a very big task, a new university. And we would not have people on hand to do the extra transformation work that has to go from 26 to 2030. So it was really a win-win situation for us. Will there be productivity gains? I'm absolutely certain there will, because any organization will have people who, for the right reasons, decide to retire. Most universities will have a turnover rate of about 10% per annum, and a lot of that is retirements. And that's the time where you say, okay, where are we actually perhaps a little bit overserviced in terms of professional skills, and where could we decide to deploy those going forward? And when you asked about what has changed since we started this journey, I think the thing that has changed is that AI has come on faster than we thought. And the advantage of going through this merger is that we have a staff cohort that is change ready. And, you know, one of the biggest risks for us is that we shrink back in our mindset to what we were before, because we have a cohort of staff now who are taking on things that they just didn't think they could do. And they've grown through that exercise. They worked hard, but they've grown through that exercise. And they will demand of us that we keep transforming to complete the project.
Second audience is the people, the government, the opinion makers, the power brokers of Adelaide and the state. Are they across it?
Very much so. I mean, certainly the political classes are. We spent our day on Monday, or our morning on Monday, in a parliamentary inquiry where we were being asked about all sorts of things. So I'm going through the transcript now to correct all of those wonderful Hansard errors that my Irish accent introduced. But the Premier spoke at a CEDA event, an American Chamber event just about 10 days ago, and he talked about the kind of the state of the state, but his essential to that was what a microeconomic reform creation of Adelaide University is for South Australia, which goes right back to your opening remarks about the things that have happened in SA to be catalysts for change over time. So he very much sees that as a centerpiece of a policy agenda. And in South Australia, higher education and what we do in terms of international education, if you look across the totality of it, is the number one export industry in this state. So, and we have an AUKUS agenda, which requires an incredibly well-educated population. And we have an energy transformation agenda. We have a luxury food and wine high-end agenda, which all of these require skilled graduates. So he can see that this is an incredibly important piece. On the street, you know, we have. I'm sure there are people who don't know that we're doing this, despite all of the branding, which is all over the place. But when we talk to somebody about why we're doing this, and you distill it right down to South Australia will have a top 5 university, they go, oh, that's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing, and you know, it resonates with people. So we've got over that activation energy that we had to get over to get people to realize that 1, we're serious, 2, we can do it, and 3, it's going to be a good outcome. I think that we're in a reasonably good spot. We still have 6 months of super hard graft ahead of us before we can flick the light switch, but we can see what the light switch looks like.
Yeah, no, I mean, between us, we have 400,000 alumni, Stephen and Tim, and, you know, we're in a state with 1.9 million people, right? So this is a disproportionately greater deal than in a state with 8 million people, right? So there are some people who would like the world to stay the same, but it's not many of them. And what we've seen is that many of the alumni who have been very generous donors to the university, once they were told that the new act in law preserves their contributions for the purpose they were given, a lot of the nervousness went away. A lot of the nervousness was from people who had decided to bequeath money to either university and wondering, will that now just go in something I don't believe in? So that was probably one of the key drivers of nervousness. And you know, there are a few people who, out of 400,000 people, you would be very worried if no one complained, because that meant the message wasn't out there.
Absolutely. Stephen, can I jump in? I've got, I thought I'd paraphrase a few questions and just get really speedy answers, because I realise we're getting to the end of the interview, and then I'll hand over to you, Stephen. Firstly, a mistake that you learned from. Anything that comes to mind?
Mechanistically, if we were going to do it again, I'd do it differently. But that's an enigmatic answer. That's where
I would have liked to have a little bit more time in the planning phase, and I think I would, if the political environment and the opportunity windows would afford that. A little bit more planning would have been good.
Awesome. ATARs, Uni SA level or Uni Adelaide level, and why?
ATAR is not the primary determinant of entry in either institution.
But we can accommodate the range of ATARs. What we will do as a university is to make sure that we have an enhanced capability to bridge the gap between the high school preparation students come with and their intrinsic ability. So for example, in many engineering courses, you do require specialist maths, otherwise the bridges will fall down. It doesn't mean that you can't get into engineering without specialist maths, but it means if you come in, you have to do extra maths in year one. So there are ways of actually having a much broader church.
And the other piece in this one, Tim, is people should go back and look at the actual basis of admission ATARs and just see how big the gaps really are.
Absolutely.
In both directions.
Yeah, no, gaming of the ATAR system, etc. Online lectures, lots of headlines last year. No in-person lectures still happening, and is that a threat to quality?
It's an absolute furphy.
Yeah. I mean, we found ourselves on a dais in Beijing answering that question. So that one was a lie that got its boots on and went all the way around the world before we were able to catch up with it. We're going to be delivering didactic experiences, face-to-face experiences for students, and we're going to have online offerings that students who wish to access them can, and students will do a blend in between, and it'll all be high quality.
Lastly, beyond bigger is better, what will be the differentiators that will make the Adelaide University beloved by South Australians and others?
So first of all, we don't necessarily think bigger is better, but we know that better is better.
I was smiling because I was wondering which of us was going to say that.
So listen, we live in a state where against the national average of about 36% of people having attained a post-year 12 tertiary education, South Australia sits at about 28 to 30%. That gap has to be closed for South Australia to have the productivity increases we need to get the economy that can ensure social cohesion. So this is absolutely a key driver for us.
Yeah. Look, I mean, we wrote a very, very definite thing into the mission of this, which is it's Australia's new for-purpose university. And the for-purpose part is incredibly important to us in terms of how this institution will be measured. And one of the first cabs off our for-purpose rank is to deploy the resources of the institution to try and tackle intergenerational disadvantage in South Australia on a longitudinal basis. So when people can see where we put our resources and our efforts where our mouths are, I think they'll realize just what a transformative thing this institution will be.
So Tim, just very clear, we are very ambitious. We are trying to land the triple helix of having excellent participation, excellent student experience, and being a university that is excellent in partnered research that addresses things that society tells us they need to improve on. That's our ambition.
Fantastic. So the last thing I will ask you is your merger consulting firm going to be called Lloyd and Hoy or Hoy and Lloyd? You don't have to answer that.
We'll take that into the creative industries and see what comes back.
Yeah, we'll see what they one thing is for sure, that my ability has been expanded immensely through this exercise. And it's been a pleasure to work with David on it. And I think we both emerged better and stronger for it. So he will have a great future ahead of him.
Yeah, and I'll always have somebody I can call when I'm in trouble.
Fantastic. Stephen, over to you.
That said it. That said what needed to be said. That was great.
And
thank you so much for having us.
A pleasure. I would love to talk to you again. Anytime you have an hour free in the next 6 months, we'll get back together.
But if not, gentlemen, goodbye and good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you both
Thank
very
you.
much.
All right.
Bye-bye.